Okay, thanks everyone, and thanks Alex for the introduction. Great to be here. I think we've got a good panel lined up, and yeah, obviously leading on from some of the discussions earlier on, particularly around media and production volume, so quite interesting to see that happening already. So we've heard already 450,000 tons is going to be the demand in 2027. So how can we get there? So with media being one of the key components, the key input drivers, and being fitted 90% of the cost at the moment of the product, it's causing some concern, I think, among those trying to bring the cost point down. So we've got a good panel here lined up to talk about some of the issues already existing and apparent in the field, but also some learnings from cell therapy and cell culture and bioreactor space as well, and also some incumbents in the field who are aware of the existing challenges with nutritional feeds and other types of products already existing. So with that, I'll just allow myself to do a quick introduction about myself. So I'm not sure if Alex mentioned, I'm Sartorius. I'm an account manager based in the UK, looking after biopharma customers. So I see a lot of the cell therapy issues with scaling up. And some technical colleagues are here as well. If you've got questions about bioreactors, they're here on hand to answer those. I'll pass over to Andrea, first of all, to introduce yourself.
Sure. Good morning. My name is Andrea. I'm with Ginkgo Bioworks. We are a company, a platform company very active in synthetic biology. The mission of our company is to make biology easier to engineer. Not easy, because it would probably never be, but easier. We rely very much on automation. We rely very much on somehow AI-driven strain development, which is what I think is quite interesting in many of the conversation we had so far. And we are very happy to be here. We're here to learn something new, and I learned a lot in a few hours this morning already. And so we want to give the angle on, provide this angle on how biology can be tamed to the needs of this very exciting industry.
Super, Susanne.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Susanne Wiegel. I am head of the Alternative Protein Program at Nutreco. And I'm always very excited to be here because I'm actually working in an industry which shouldn't yet be here. So Nutreco is a traditional animal nutrition and aquaculture feed company. And I want to say thank you to Justin from Wildtide this morning, because half of my talking points he had already this morning about the scale that we are working towards. We are a business that works exactly at that scale that the cultivated meat and seafood industry wants to reach to make a difference. We are a global leader in animal feed, but we are actually family-owned, which is very helpful for the mission we are aiming at together here. We have two business units. One is looking at any animal that is running around on Earth, livestock, pet food, even things like horses we are feeding. And we have one huge business that is aquaculture nutrition. Both these businesses bring very important capabilities to the media area, the cell culture media area, in this path of upscaling the industry. And this is exactly the mission that we are on in. We want to feed the future, and therefore 3 years ago we decided essentially to become on the one hand side a strategic investor into alternative proteins, so both into the cultivated meat and seafood space and also fermentation-based companies, but at the same time work towards a business and value proposition for the emerging industry. Because right now we are nowhere where any of input suppliers or an ecosystem around this this emerging industry can actually exist by itself. Right now, we need strategic companies that see the long-term future and help growing the startups into a meaningful volume. And this is why we are here.
Super, and Grace.
Hi, my name is Grace Lee. I'm representing Eppendorf as a field application specialist. My background is with cell therapy, so I understand the importance and the value of large-scale culture of very precious cells and how we need to be able to not only maintain the volume, but also make sure that these precious cells are getting the nutrients and the perfect conditions they need so that they can expand, proliferate, and maintain their activity. So, of course, we all know Eppendorf as a pipette and centrifuge company, but we also do have bioreactor vessels as well as controllers, which are being used across the country for meat culture experimentation.
Super, thank you, panelists. So just kicking off probably with Susanne, with regulatory approvals coming up for the commercialization of culture meat and seafood, what are some of the main issues that you see in this space moving into sort of a commercial scale production and upscaling? What does that mean to you?
Yeah, actually, the prospect of more regulatory approvals, first of all, super excites us, right? Finally, this would be really amazing if we had more than one country and more than one company being regulatory approved, because obviously, without the regulatory approval, the industry cannot move ahead at all, right? Maybe taking one step back, explaining a little bit also from our side what Justin started already in his talk this morning. We know 350 million tons of meat, so not pounds or kilograms or anything, but tons per meat are consumed each year by our population. And right now, obviously, the cultivated meat companies are working from lab scale towards the first 50, 100 liter, 1,000 liter bioreactors, which has nothing to do with any production volume that makes any dent in this meat supply chain, right? So this is also true for the media approaches that we have right now. Media is nothing new, right? The pharmaceutical industry, life science, the companies that are here actually have worked on this since ages, and we actually have an industry with a pharmaceutical industry being totally commercialized and working very nicely. The scale of the existing industry today, however, if you look, for example, at cell culture media, they are producing worldwide a few thousand tons per year. If you imagine that essentially you will need maybe a kilogram, maybe half a kilogram, 1/3 of a kilogram of media for making 1 kilogram of meat, you can imagine with 350 million tons of meat needed per year, this is not very much. This wouldn't even get the first commercial scale facility, for example, from an eJust, which goes in the direction of a real meat factory with a projected outcome of 15,000 tons per year. That wouldn't be even enough for them. So meaning, if we want to scale, we actually really need to have different approaches. And here's, I think, where the animal nutrition industry really uses principles since decades that are really important to translate to this new industry too. So maybe to illustrate what we are doing, I mean, there's 1 billion tons of feed every single year, right? A global leader in animal nutrition like Nutreco, for example, we are producing 10 million tons of feed each year. This is totally typical volume. We have the supply chain, the procurement to get the ingredients in. We turn them around into valuable products, and then we are selling them again. There is actually quite some overlap of cell culture media and the ingredients that are coming in for animal feed. Our livestock business, for example, is very much focused on so-called premix. That is, in the end, a not so complicated basal media. Amino acids go in, vitamins go in, minerals go in, glucose go in, and that is meant to make a feed complete in the end. But you could never feed animals just on this. The production volume of these amino acids and vitamins and minerals and everything is much too low, right? Although the ones that are used in animal feed are really produced in millions of tons per year. But you could not base this, the continuous meat production on something like that. So what is it based on? We all know this, on agricultural raw materials. Corn, wheat, soy protein, the big crops that you really have in the world. So that is, I think, the first principle that we need to understand. If we want to get to really relevant commercial volumes, it will be very hard to do this on a chemically defined media. That doesn't mean that we can't use it right now in our next 10 years of upscaling, but at some point we will reach a point where this is not possible anymore. Luckily, we know that cells can also grow on agricultural raw materials, right? We have also companies here who are doing hydrolysates of protein, for example, and cells grow very well on that. Of course, the commercial situation right now is that all these products, whether it's chemically defined media or whether it is hydrolysate-based media, are still at a cost point that is much too high. So meaning what we actually need to develop over the next 10 years is a translational journey, if you want, where we start enabling the companies in their current status with the media that just works and is available. Best example is now just taking the typical basal media and moving it from pharma grade to food grade. But then very soon we need a transition where really we produce at large scale, for example, these hydrolysates from agricultural materials and make sure that the cells actually work on these. So in our upscaling journey, I think this is one very important part. And I believe here also the different industries have to work together. Animal feed, for example, from our side, but also the pharmaceutical side very much, because what has to be merged is really the principles and the cleanness and the quality grade that still is good enough for cells to grow, but with this vast, volume-based, high-volume, low-margin approach of renewable agricultural material as the basis for feed in a reliable way so that the cell biology isn't disrupted.
Yeah, super, thanks for that. And touching on a very important point, I think, next, Andrea. So with the cost driver being media here, and we're talking about this today, some of those components which are added to the essential medias are growth factors as such. Are there ways we can rapidly screen for those? What's the way to bring the cost of those materials down? And what sort of grade would they be, perhaps? What would you look for?
Sure. So I think that growth factors are certainly the first thing that everyone thinks about when we think about cost of the medium. So I think if you take probably a few techno-economical analysis on these, there is a consensus around there as one of the major drivers for bringing costs down. It's not the only factor, obviously, but it depends also on how these dynamics will look like. What is the low-hanging fruit here? And it's not going to be sufficient, but we have to start from somewhere. I think that there are several indications that are going to be alternatives to generate growth factors that are more friendly when it comes to cost. We did an attempt on that, so we do have strains that are producing growth factors in a gram per liter scale, and that is certainly a starting point. I think that the conversation has to go a little bit deeper than that, though. So if you think of substituting growth factors entirely, that's certainly a good start, because you can have a material that is microbial generated. It's certainly cheaper than what you can get conventionally, let's say. But what I think is also very important is to understand, if you really want to substitute everything you have in a medium with a more accessible or cheap source, or you want to be a little bit more disruptive than that. We heard a lot of very interesting and disruptive ideas this morning in the keynote, and I would like to put an asterisk on that and go back to some of those later. But I think that one thing that as a movement can be pursued is also understanding a little bit more what happens, understanding how much growth factor you need specifically. So we talk about precision fermentation, we have to go, I think, way deeper than we are. So this is one element, making sure that what you have is what you really need. Another element that I think is very interesting for my perspective, which again is on the synthetic biology element, is on the design. So we heard about medium design in a way. I think we can also go, and the technology is probably mature, to go into ingredient design. Many companies, I think, are doing very exciting things in a food technology domain. What we cannot tackle necessarily is the intrinsic nature of the components that we're using, unless we go more radically towards how they're really made. And there are ways to do that. We had a lot of exciting conversation with companies that are interested in that. Nature out there is amazing. You have, even though you're forced to use the same bunch of growth factors now, that doesn't mean that that's the best growth factor you can select. Simply, you don't access that particular growth factor. I think about all the very exciting culture meat on shrimp and a few others, in fact, that would benefit from designing products. And with design, obviously, you go on a completely different archetype when it comes to production, especially if you can keep it simple and effective. And it's obviously much easier to say that than just to do it. But we think that this is an element that is going to be crucial. If we go a little bit beyond growth factors, I think recombinant protein in general is a major and exciting element to work on, following the same logic. Regulatory, at some point the regulatory element will come in, obviously, and that's also very complicated probably to address. But if the benefit is directly on the cost of goods sold and on the efficiency of the whole process, probably it's worthy to go there. So I don't think that you can reach that sort of improvement in terms of COGS without radically thinking about every single component that you put in and how to improve some aspect of that. Not just cost necessarily, but it would be awesome if you would have something that is cheaper and more potent in its action, so you will need less and less. And especially when you think about scaling up these mind-blowing numbers that we hear in terms of volume, at some point you hit the ceiling. Even if you can express 20 grams per liter of a growth factor right now, still it's a lot of fermentation that you need to run in order to maintain the economics in a positive term.
Exactly, going back to a lot of those challenges and problems already been solved and revisiting them with different solutions maybe. So Grace, maybe a question for you about the volumes required for culturing these types of products. What's available already and what solutions could companies look at, and maybe how does that affect media that's used throughout that production process?
Sure. So if we are starting from the lab, we can scale up from as small as 150 mLs all the way up to over 500 liters. So we have that technology available to us in terms of bioreactor vessel size and the controllers that can control those vessels. Additionally, we address kind of the ingredients and the components of media that will sustain the cell growth, but technologically there's also additional things we can add, such as microcarriers, which I'm sure some of you are familiar with, are small components we can add to bioreactors to increase surface area to allow for more robust cell growth. So in combination with having a well-characterized, very rich nutrition source. By combining that with the technology that we have available, we can really optimize and maximize the proliferation of these cells, which is kind of our main goal.
Yeah, definitely. There's a lot of different culture methods out there as well. Is something like perfusion looked at for culture in this area? And also just in terms of media preparation and storage, is that something that companies, do you think, will be able to facilitate on site?
Absolutely. So in terms of media storage, since that's what you mentioned last, there's opportunities to outsource media formation. So if you outsource that, we have those companies available, and they can provide validation as well as testing to make sure batch-to-batch variability is decreased, which is important for your cell product. In terms of storage, for the volume we'll need, we would want something ideally that's room temperature, storage safe. Additionally, since this is going to be in cell culture, something that's amenable to sterilization, probably by heat, because that's usually the cheapest alternative. So those are things that are need to be considered for large-grade media production. And the first part of your question, if you could repeat it again, please.
So it's just around really the different methods of culture.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So with our bioreactors, there's kind of three main modes. There's batch, fed batch, as well as perfusion. So batch is just a closed system. Fed batch is where you are continually adding media in, so constantly increasing the volume. And perfusion, which is probably the most relevant for today's audience, is where you can cycle in fresh media while also cycling out old media. So constantly replenishing the media and the nutrient source and letting your cells grow very comfortably.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for that. And I think there's certainly a lot of technical aspects that will be drawn on in the next day or so around those topics. Just going some of the pre-prepared questions we have, just looking at the time as well. Want to get some of your questions in too. But we were talking about the growth factors, the media itself, and thinking about cell therapy and learnings there. And there's been sort of regulatory issues around what appears in the final product. So just a question to the panel, really. Are there any issues that you perceive around the quality or grade of raw materials going into the media, considering the fact they may actually appear in the final product? And in this case, it will be food. So, yeah, just open question.
I can maybe take that. So I think it's really a key question. From the ingredient perspective, probably the strong impact on how you prepare in the sorry if I stay on the example of the growth factors, but how you the DSP for generating that material, which is already very impactful on your process, and how you design that element will have a very strong correlation on the grade that you need. And I think it's going to be a bit of a try and error to understand what is the regulatory requirement beyond the quality and how that can harmonize with the strong cost reduction that you need to achieve. So, and typically I think DSP in protein production is around even 30 to 70% of your cost. So it's incredibly impactful how to define that. How that can be done, I think it's a very big question, and I'm not sure how to answer that.
It's okay. Susanne?
Yeah, maybe just to add to this, of course, this from the regulatory side, certainly the biological molecules in the cell culture media are the hardest part. So you have it much harder than the basal media side, the nutrients. In principle, I think, again, when we are talking more and more scale up, the need here is for reduction over, sorry to say that, but too much engineering, right? I think what the companies need to find is this optimal balance between getting exactly those maybe growth factors, biological molecules that are minimum needed, but then extremely efficient. Because in the end, I mean, everyone knows this albumin is the best example. If you have to put too many biological proteins in too high concentration in your cell culture media, it's a killer for the techno-economic case. And so the more you can get it targeted, the better. Let's not forget also in the future, and I think there is a lot of innovation ongoing already, also plant-based approaches for giving growth signals will be extremely important. This is not our core area right now, so we are in this business with the first step facilitating more the nutrient side, amino acids and so on. But for sure there are out there also in our company exciting opportunities still to be explored. One example is, you know, feed of course has a lot of supplements also in there. And our company has a phytogenics platform. So phytogenics as plant-based molecules, very specific molecules with a selection mechanism. I think the industry should really make sure that they are also looking at these options, having natural molecules, easier regulatory approval as the basis for their growth medium. On the nutrient side, of course, super important what everyone is aiming at right now, move from pharmaceutical ingredients to food certified ingredients. That is mandatory for the costs. There is no other alternative in terms of upscaling, even in the short-term future anyways. And at the same time, when you approach the regulatory authorities and your cell culture media is already 95% food certified, the ingredients have GRAS certifications, then of course your team has it much easier because every single ingredient that is not allowed for food so far has to be really accompanied with a very detailed risk assessment. And so make sure that you only keep in what you need. Frankly, even on the basal media, there are a few components that are not suitable for food or not allowed in food right now. If you can try to get rid of them, that's really the best approach. I'm talking a lot about the 350 million tons of meat and the big upscaling. Of course, we know this is a journey, right? So from my perspective, the most important actually, or the most important challenge that the industry has ahead of themselves is not, will this be upscaled or can we make an economic case at upscaled volumes when we really have those bioreactors that pump out 15,000 tons per meat a year? I frankly think we will get to this point. The problem is, are we dying on the way towards this? So the next years, of course, for all these companies are a very difficult journey between getting enough investor money in to further upscale. No one can jump from a 50-liter bioreactor to a 100,000-liter bioreactor. That doesn't even exist right now. And so there need to be multiple steps in between that are very capex intensive, that need a lot of investor money, and the company that is able to produce with 1,000-liter bioreactors or even 10,000-liter bioreactors at a really commercially viable fashion, where you have a business case and you make a margin and you can attract private equity capital, growth capital, that company still has to be found. So in the end, in the next years, it's very important, and I'm also looking here at the ecosystem, the future suppliers of this industry, that we work together and support those companies in these early stages where maybe it is not yet a business case for us. And so from our side, I'm very happy that we have this backing from the family behind Nutreco. And one thing what we are practically doing right now, for example, is we put a food certified, very small plant for basal media with the food grade ingredients and the relevant supply chain in place, just dedicated to cultivated meat. So no distraction with our current business, no questions whether we make pet food there or something like that. It's just dedicated for cultivated meat, because what we have seen is the companies at the current stage with their small bioreactors of 100 liter, if you have a 1,000-liter bioreactor, it's very exciting, right? And you want to run it continuously. Those volumes are still so small that really a commercial facility from our side doesn't make sense. But it is important that suppliers also come in and take these strategic steps, although we know there is no business right now, to make sure that the cultivated meat and seafood companies can get over those hurdles, that they have strong corporate partners who also show to investors that we believe in this industry and we bring them over to the really meaningful volumes. And so, yeah, I hope that a lot
Andrea's
of corporates do that.
Point you want to add in here?
Yes. I think you made a great point. We heard this morning an interesting analogy with Tesla. So at some point, Tesla was making a huge profit out of carbon emission credits, more than on selling cars. So if we take that piece of information, and then we also add that, if you look at most of the techno-economical analysis, you see that a significant factor that was in fact mentioned this morning on improving the industry would be a different way of considering the return on your investment, perhaps with a contribution from government subsidies, which is what carbon emission credits were all about. You see that all these elements are really matching this narrative. There are some, I think, huge changes in the perception even from investors to do that, and not everyone is as fortunate as you are. So I think that if we really want this to happen for the common good, which was, I think, my main take-home message from the talk this morning, at some point these considerations have to be made. Otherwise, it's a really uphill battle.
Yeah, definitely. Grace, anything on that point?
Really
okay, perfect. I think one other aspect is quite interesting is sort of what platforms are out there for companies to have outsourced media development. Is that something that is offered currently, maybe by your company or by other companies out there? And could that sort of avoid a lot of the development costs and accelerate timelines for startups?
So that is not exactly our business model, in the sense that we do want to support customers to develop better ingredients. I cannot say that we will be in a position of going that decisively towards media development. Having said that, because of the nature of the collaboration we have with customers, we're certainly happy to contribute with that, and contribute also with, I think, companies that do that without necessarily the ingredient design element in that. So again, speaks volumes on the ecosystem so we can generate, and we will certainly be very excited to be part of that. Probably bringing the concept of developing ingredients forwards towards full-fledged media development is super exciting, and as I said before, this is we are looking into that, as well as other elements that contribute to the circularity of the whole process, and it would be super cool to try that or to get into that conversation, even though I think at the moment we want to kind of be real and stick to the core message.
Yeah, definitely. Does Eppendorf offer any services that could help startups in this space for media development? Grace?
For media development?
Yeah.
I'm not sure about that, but I'm sure there's a lot of other companies out there that can definitely.
Yeah, I think it's just reach out at the right point, isn't it? Ingredients is the main issue, maybe.
Yeah.
So yeah, find the ingredients first and get some advice. Susanne?
Yeah, and maybe if I can add to that, actually, indeed, I believe the cultivated meat and seafood companies currently do not have the media development so much on the agenda what they want to outsource. If they want to do that, there are plenty of classical media houses who do a tremendous job for doing that. I think currently, at the current stage of the industry, I believe this will change, but at the current stage of the industries, the companies more look like towards internal know-how and IP generation, and really keep the secret sauce in a way a little bit to themselves. Where they do need help, indeed, is then getting that media. Because if you face as a small startup the current situation that, of course, you can get a customized media from the media houses, but those prices immediately kill your case. And on the one hand side, you are not getting what you actually want, a food-grade media, but in addition, you are also customer number 150, because much more powerful companies want their services before you. And so I think this is exactly where we need to enable the companies right now, keep the know-how, the IP with them, but then take off this burden of setting up this unbelievable supply chain of 50, 60, 70 ingredients that you need at the right food certification, ideally from 2 manufacturers each, right? And that is not very innovative work. So I can tell you that is, we have 100 procurement colleagues in our company, and there is a reason why. It is a very important part of our business, of course, to have a stable and high-quality supply chain, but they are not located in the innovation department. And so, enabling the companies there, I think, will free up a lot of resources on their side to put into bigger challenges.
I think you almost touched on a point there about suppliers and sourcing second suppliers for these kind of products. It's difficult when there's very few out there in terms of the components, but yeah, got to be done. It's a problem that needs to be solved by procurement, obviously, as well. So just wary of the time before we go over to the customer questions. Sorry, in my sales mode. You're our customers. So just around the issue of large-scale media production and liquid and powder preparation, what's some of the issues with the supply chain at the moment, and how could those be solved for a new player coming in, looking at the volumes we're looking at? What should they be wary of? Lessons from other industries here, I think, as well.
Okay, I think we have to look at the different components of the media, because there are different challenges. I think the biggest part for a cultivated meat and seafood company right now to get to a media price that enables their techno-economic case is, of course, still the serum replacement. So all those growth factors, albumins, insulins, transferins of the world that you actually don't really want to see in your cell culture media. Ideally, they would be just gone, right? And I think the companies are doing a tremendous job in really reducing, also, by the way, things like getting away from microcarriers, getting into suspension, getting into simpler serum replacement formulations. They are definitely on the right track there. I think there is a challenge to get the right ingredients that are also regulatory-wise okay for that part. And so far, I'm not yet seeing a full outsourced approach how to do that. I hope over the next years we are getting more to those plant-based, more also universally applicable base formulations in a way to enable that, because that is still a little bit the problem. On the nutrient side, well, frankly, I don't think there is a real problem right now in getting any volumes. The real problem will start in 10 years when you really have to fill your commercial bioreactors. Then I would suggest to go away from these 20 amino acids as bases. But right now, the challenge is more the other way around. Because the volumes are so small and the kilogram space when you think about powdered media, the problem is the companies don't get access to those easily. Because if you call manufacturers or suppliers and you tell them over the next year you need half a kilogram of each amino acid, they just put down the phone again, and that is that. And so this part needs to be enabled right now to get the companies then actually to the volumes where suppliers are happy to speak to them and where a real business case starts.
Super. I think, yeah, with that, we'll go to questions from the audience. Alex, over to you.
If you have any questions, feel free to line up here. We do have time for several questions, and I think some people are coming. We have time for 3 or 4 questions.
Okay, thank you.
Hi. First of all, thank you to everyone in the panel for participating. That was great and really informative. My name is Bob Curry. I work for Cytiva, and I run the cell culture media business for Cytiva. So this panel is very near and dear to my heart. You spoke quite a bit about moving from pharma-grade raw materials into food-grade raw materials, and I agree that's a great source of cost reduction, but there's not a lot of evidence to suggest that they'll work the same. How do you address that? Because the level of impurities in food grade are different from the level of impurities in pharma grade, and you may not get as consistent cell culture, or you could potentially be introducing some trace metals or something that's cytotoxic. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Maybe I can take that. So actually, we have done in-house at Nutreco extensive both QA and regulatory analysis between the different grades of the nutrients. And the reality is, while on paper there are certain differences, especially in reality there are very little differences. If you think especially about the class of amino acids and vitamins, they are all made via fermentation. And at the large manufacturers, which usually are sitting in China because the others are not competitive enough, what you see is they're producing here is food labeled, here is pharma labeled, and there's feed labeled. Of course, for pharma, very often you have some further purification steps, and then especially it is a heck of a lot documentation that they really promise to you that they have made XYZ sure that nothing is in there. We have done tests with our collaboration partners and future customers with our food grade supply chain. And by the way, we are a feed company, right? Of course, we are curious because ultimately when you scale this up, it makes a lot of sense also to include feed grade ingredients. And in all relevant nutrient classes, glucose, amino acids, vitamins, and minerals, we see very good performance. So we cannot confirm that this is a real risk. And I also believe it's the only way to go, because otherwise, price-wise, we can just stop today. I have to say, though, it's an early industry, right? I think I'm not aware that anyone has run already something like a 1,000-liter bioreactor fully on food-grade ingredients. So, of course, this is also a process. On this side here, it's experiments first at small scale and then at larger scale. But the consensus is that you do not expect that this would not be possible.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, good morning. Thank you all for this presentation, this panel. This was awesome to be able to learn from this. My name is Lily Yang from the Atchison Group, a food safety consulting group. And I think a question that I had regarding what we're talking about, especially all these inputs, and I believe, Andreas, when you mentioned, thinking about when we're looking at substitutions and synthetics, and as we move forward, right, we got to move forward somehow. A lot of this, obviously, this bioreactor and input part falls into the FDA regulations. And as we think about this from supply chain preventive controls, we're learning and moving into that space. Have you all considered how you would communicate or how you would work with clients and customers specifically around the verification and validation of that supply chain preventive control, and what can we look at that in terms of the food safety aspects moving onwards?
Sure, maybe I can take this. I think, yeah, it's a great question. I don't really have a great answer. I think the only way ahead is really keeping these open channel with the regulatory and not assuming that at some point it will go on by its own inertia. And especially we heard about how important it is to have people, the public on board here. Only transparency will actually lead us there. So that's my best way I could answer this question. Is certainly incredibly relevant, I think, as a movement.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, it's me again. I'm Daisy from New Age Eats. Thank you so much for a really interesting discussion. My question is, so as a process engineer, and we're trying to bring down costs, right, and we're talking about media, everyone I think in this room is here because we care not only about animal welfare, but about the planet as well, and Justin touched on that really well this morning. I worry, though, that part of us bringing the media cost down and going to something like soy hydrolysates that Susanne mentioned, are we creating another problem? Because soy, planting and farming can also lead to deforestation, right? So is the onus on us as the users or on the supplier side to make sure that those practices are also sustainable? Or are you going to leave it to us to say, like, we don't want to use it? For example, New Age Eats doesn't want to use single use because of the plastic use. Who is the onus on to make sure that what we do instead of the conventional, raw materials doesn't actually create another problem that may be even worse?
Yeah, maybe I can take that one. So I love your question because at least and I think most of the audience here is here because of this environmental sustainability aspect, right? We want to produce protein in an environmentally more efficient manner. And animal welfare, of course, is also very important. So in that context, I actually, again, love to be in this animal feed company, and I tell you why. The sustainability footprint of this, this process will be driven essentially by two things. One is the energy that is used, and of course also the steel and so on that you need until you have it up and running, but then the energy. And the other one is very simple, the nutrients. Nothing else. That is actually the same for protein production today, because animal feed is by far the biggest footprint in that protein production. When we as an animal feed company, of course, are very aware of this. We have a sustainability department in-house, and so we have LCA specialists and people who think all day long, how can we make animal feed more sustainable? And so what is one fantastic approach, you have to move from these, amino acids are very important, right? You have to move from these 20, by fermentation, synthesized chemically, single molecule amino acids, you have to move away from them to agricultural raw materials and hydrolysates. Because if you don't do that, you have too much bulk that you have to produce via an additional bioreactor fermentation. Yeah, everything is done by fermentation in the end. But what you can do beautifully on that agricultural raw material side is the cells just eat amino acids, maybe dipeptides, maybe tripeptides, but very small protein parts, right? And so what you don't need is, you don't need intact protein. And that is actually a great opportunity to enter the world of food byproducts. So in the food production system, there is a lot of processes where you keep leftovers, like, for example, yeast or other leftovers, where there's still quite some protein in there, but it's so smushed up that no one can do anything with it. This may be different here. So one of our internal innovation areas for Nutreco in cell feed is actually looking at what could be promising byproducts that we could apply in such a process and really use it as the amino acid base for the cell feed. Here, the aquaculture link, believe it or not, is extremely favorable, because aquaculture has exactly the same problem. Previously, fish meal was used a lot, right? It's still used a lot as protein source, because all those salmons that we like are actually carnivores. Then the aquaculture industry moved from fish meal to soy, actually due to sustainability reasons. Now, this has become so successful that it contributes to even more deforestation, which is a major driver of the footprint. And so now they are looking into what other innovative proteins are in there. So we have a whole department looking at alternative proteins for feed. Single-cell proteins play a huge role there. We know everything about insects, about algae, and so on. And here, I see a lot of potential to actually use, for example, single-cell proteins that have been identified as cost competitive. I can tell you aquaculture doesn't look at any ingredient over $1 per kilogram. Aquaculture scales it up, essentially. But then we can use this more sustainable source also for cell feed. And so I think the supplier industry here is, so we are not leaving the cultivated meat and seafood industry alone. We need to be the drivers here for saying these are the ingredients that can be environmentally better than what is out there today, and offer adapted solutions that then also work in cell biology.
Thank you so much. Yeah,
Super.
that makes me really
Sorry, was your
optimistic.
second part on plastics as well and single-use instead?
Oh no, that was just sort of our, part of the bigger question about environmental sustainability
Perfect.
for our
One for later,
processes. But that was a great answer. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Fascinating panel. My name's Ahmed from Celagri, and my question is towards Susanne. There are a lot of concerns of the impact of cell-cultured meat could have on conventional livestock players, including animal feed players. Similar to how farmers can grow grain and other feed ingredients for animal feedstock, do you imagine a future where those same feed players are producing and growing the ingredients for cell culture media formulations?
Yeah, thank you for your question. So I didn't expect it in that panel. I actually get it all the time at home. So what happens with the farmers and so on. So I think there are two layers. First layer, not related to your question. We have talked about these 350 million tons of meat, right? There is no way that this is a disruption to the existing industry, because the amount of CapEx investment that you need and the amount of steel that you need to put in and the amount of commercial products that need to work at the cost profile in the beginning and so on, it just ain't gonna happen that this is a quick disruption. This will be a transition, which frankly I personally also think is usually better for the world. We want as little disruption as possible and as much transition as possible. And so I don't think those farmers will be out of jobs. But having said that, of course, the farmers will have a very, very important role in terms of also then providing the basis really for the cell feed. And that is true on the carbon side, on the glucose side, but that is also true on the amino acid side for sure. And so I don't really see any near-term future where any of this would be at risk. It's more really, let's make sure that we also benefit from all the expertise that is out there in the agriculture sector to see what is best translatable and usable as input for cell feed.
Thank you.
Super, thank you. I think that we've come to time, so thanks to panelists and to yourselves for listening. Thank you.